Greetings and welcome. I'm Dr. Mark Pitstick, your host for Ask the Soul Doctors on HealthyLife.net radio. After working with many thousands of people over the last 40 years, I've assembled sensible, evidence-based answers to the most commonly questions asked about life, death, and afterlife. And each month on this show, I interview experts in consciousness studies and share their answers. We don't claim to have all the answers or the only answers, but we do have some good answers that have helped many people make more sense of this Earth experience. And with us today to help answer those questions is Dr. Gary Schwartz, who earned his Ph.D. at Harvard and was a professor there and at Yale. Currently, Dr. Schwartz is a professor at the University of Arizona and director of the Laboratory for Advances in Consciousness and Health. He's published more than 450 scientific papers and co-edited 11 academic books, so his scientific credentials are unquestionable. He authored 6 books, including The Afterlife Experiment and, most recently, The Sacred Promise. A frequent TV and radio guest, I'm honored to have Dr. Schwartz with us on Ask the Soul Doctors. His website, www.drgaryschwartz.com, again, drgaryschwartz.com, is content-rich, so be sure to visit it for the many free articles, videos, and how to order his books and products. So, welcome, Gary.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. Well, before we hear your answers to the most commonly asked questions, please tell our listeners a bit about your research and professional experience so they understand the breadth of the scientific research behind your answers.
Okay. My original research career was in what's called psychophysiology, a relationship between the mind and body, now called mind-body medicine. But my research then took me into the areas bridging both energy and spirituality. So, for example, I did a book called The Energy Healing Experiments and directed an NIH-funded Center for Frontier Medicine and Biofield Science, scientific gobbledygook language, but basically it was on the science of energy and energy healing. But I've also been doing research on the bridge between energy and spirit, and that takes you to the research that I've done on the topic of the soul and life after death. I published 3 books in that area. I've had the privilege to work with some of the most gifted and research evidence-based mediums in the world, and it's been a great privilege to be able to do that kind of research.
Yes, and for listeners, we discussed Dr. Schwartz's research in both the Soul Proof book and the Soul Proof documentary film. For those of you who haven't been engaged in scientific research, usually what's called a P probability of less than 1,000, 1 in 1,000 is required for publishable work, and that is that the findings of the study are found to be due to randomness. The chances are less than 1 per 1,000. And Dr. Schwartz, some of the research you did, the probability numbers were what?
Well, it depends upon the study, but they could be 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, 1 in a million, depending upon which particular experiment or how you combine the experiments. But they've been very, very. They reach all the standards of reliability.
Yeah, amazing, off-the-chart probabilities that those results are due to just chance or randomness. So, well, I appreciate that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and wade through the questions. And the first one, of course, that gets asked so often is, who am I? Is there anything to me beyond this human body?
The answer, of course, is, and I'm going to speak as a scientist, not from my own personal experience, but as a scientist, the answer is yes. Everything we know from contemporary physics, everything that, quote, is a combination of what we call energy and information. In fact, what we mean by matter, what we experience as matter, is actually, quote, organized energy. And the interesting thing about information and energy is that in the, quote, vacuum of space, it's there forever. So, for example, when we look up at a sky at night, and if we're out in the country away from city lights, there's no moon, there's no clouds, we see the light of thousands of stars. And with telescopes, we can see billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars. And all that light's been traveling for millions and billions of years in the vacuum of space, and it doesn't disappear. I mean, if it became, quote, randomized, if it became distorted in the vacuum of space, when you and I would look at the sky at night, we'd see mush. We don't see mush. We see a history of starlight going back millions or billions of years. Light has a kind of, quote, immortality. And our energy and information is like the light from distant stars. And that includes, by the way, what we call our thoughts, our feelings, our personalities, our consciousness. So what happens is that just basic understanding of physics, and particularly quantum physics, leads us to the conclusion that our essence is like the essence of matter itself, which is information and energy, which sounds very much like soul and spirit.
Okay, so for those listeners, you may have to listen to his vocabulary twice or to this interview twice, because he's speaking so succinctly and has had so much experience in consciousness research that it's learning a new language, really, throwing away the idea of death and even afterlife, and just realizing it's all life.
Exactly, it is all life.
Of energy right now.
Exactly, the word death is no longer appropriate. There is no death. There is transformation. There is quote, moving to other dimensions. But according to this, death, the word death is like the word the sun revolves around the earth. That was a mistake. It's just not that way.
Yeah, awesome. And of course, that's such wonderful news and has so many powerful implications for every aspect of our life. Well, the second question is, the people ask then, okay, if I'm an infinite being of energy, what in the world am I doing on a place like planet Earth?
That's, of course, always a great question. And the simplest answer, and of course a scientist can't give this answer, but the general conclusion is that, why is a bird on the earth? And why is an elephant on the earth? Why are any living system on the earth? And you could argue, well, some people argue, as you know, is that we're here because we're here to learn life's lessons. We're here to grow. We're here to learn and to develop our, quote, individual souls. And at some level, that's true. You could also say the same thing applies to birds and fish and tigers and so on. All creatures are here, and they're here living out their respective, quote, lives. But I think human beings have a bigger purpose than just that, because we have the capacity to reflect on all of this. And we have, in particular, I think we have the capacity to be of service. So I think that my working hypothesis is that we're here on Earth not just because we're here to learn and grow, but we're here also to be able to develop the capacity to love, to increasingly appreciate and love ever more things, to increasingly take ever greater responsibility for things. And it's not just that we go back to heaven and be happier, but it's that we can be wise shepherds and parents and people who express love and caring. But that's now a personal opinion as opposed to really a scientific one.
Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit more about that? I know you have lots to say about that. That's such an important answer you're giving.
Well, if you think about it, and I wrote about this. I wrote a book called The GOD Experiment, where GOD stands for Guiding, Organizing, Designing Process. And at the end of this book, I had a chapter that said, Infinite Love, the Ultimate Gift from God. And a lesson that occurred to me many years ago when I was a professor at Yale is that human beings, unlike any other creature that we know of, we're like little love machines, because we come onto the planet and we literally love everything. And we experience it. We're curious about everything. And it's only if we experience pain, or only if our parents punish us for doing things, or we're told this is not, we're not supposed to love this, or we're not supposed to love that, we have the capacity to love everything. And one of the things that's quite remarkable of the expression of the capacity for human love is really illustrated in a university. Because here you have, thousands of professors in all walks of life developing passions for questions, whether they're about atoms and physics or whether it's about molecules and chemistry. And my father was a chemist and a pharmacist. He loved chemicals. And then people who are biologists, and they develop their lives studying fruit flies, or they study finches, or they have passions for particular topical areas, or people fall in love with psychology or sociology or political science or anthropology, on and on and on. Human beings have the capacity, as individuals, to love almost any aspect. And I think that this capacity for love is one of the most defining qualities. And as people evolve in their, quote, soul growth, we hear terms such as universal love, we hear unconditional love, we hear phrases like God loves everyone and everything. And that certainly was the message of great spiritual teachers such as Jesus. And what I realize is that we're like, quote, programmed to love. I mean, we are designed with that capacity. And I think that what's fascinating is that the science of love and the psychology of love and the biology of love is showing us that this is almost like an untapped resource. But it requires education in us for us to manifest it. And that's, for me, my greatest, I think, inspiration is in expanding people's capacity to appreciate their capacity to love and then to honor it.
Excellent. So after this birth experience is over, since we know that no one really dies, what happens after the physical body dies, though?
Well, after the physical body dies, our energy and information and all of our memories, all of our history, continues in the, quote, vacuum of space. And I put this in quote. And so since everything that ever happened is present there, and again, I'm just slightly reframing what contemporary physics tells us. This itself is not, quote, controversial. Then the question is, what do we do with all that energy and information? What do we do with our life experience? And there's research, and I'm going to talk about a scientific research, which says that a few things can happen. Number one, people can, quote, reincarnate. And I'm sure you and your listeners know there's evidence, for example, from the University of Virginia, very strong evidence that supports that, quote, hypothesis, that we can return and continue to grow, and more importantly, continue to be of service. In addition, some people can choose to continue to be of service, but not necessarily, quote, reincarnate. In fact, for me, the most exciting part of our current research is that we have been working on technology to detect the presence of spirit, with the goal of developing what I call the soul phone, the evolution from the cell phone to the smartphone to a, quote, soul phone. And that, in principle, and I describe this in my book and research about this in my book, The Sacred Promise, it's only a matter of time, if all of this continues as it does, where we're going to be able to be in communication using technology with people who have, quote, died, i.e. people who have transitioned. And now the love that we had on earth can continue to be, what's the word, not just preserved, but sustained and continue and evolve, not only with people who we knew on the earth, but people who we never met on the earth, who continue to wish to be of service. The subtitle to my book, The Sacred Promise, is How Science is Discovering Spirit's Collaboration with Us in Our Daily Lives. And so the whole notion that another role that people can do is that they don't have to come back to the earth in a physical form, but they can continue to have relationships with their children or their grandchildren, or continue to care about the planet because they love Earth, they love this home, and wish to be of service. And then, of course, there's all the freedom that once you've lost your physical body, you can go to other places in the universe, you can potentially go to other universes, you can meld with the source, and so on. There's lots of, opportunities.
Sure.
After one.
Sure. And does your personal and professional experience indicate that is a choice for each person, each soul?
I would say, but at a professional level, scientifically, you have to conclude that that's a possibility. Again, if I don't have evidence, I don't want to say, science can predict things as opposed to what it's demonstrated. The truth is, there's no science on the question of human choice after they've died, and human choice about reincarnating. We just don't have those data yet. But if you're asking my predictions, the answer is yes, we have choice. There's choice at every level. That there's relative choice, and also that we can have responsibilities and also have contracts. You know the phrase "as above, so below." Well, there's also aspects of "as below, so above," and I think that the notion of our fulfilling certain missions is a very plausible one.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Gary, you referred to this GOD principle, this organizing intelligence, some call God, source energy. What is your understanding of what this phenomena is like, and what is our relationship to it?
Well, in the book that I wrote called The GOD Experiments, I used the subtitle, How Science is Discovering God in Everything, Including Us. And my scientific approach to this is that, you know, the word small has the word all in it. Literally, the all is in the small. And the notion that we have in physics of the hologram, that you can have something that stores the information of everything, and that everything could be simultaneously present everywhere. So the notion is that there's this infinite potential. There is what David Bohm called the implicate order. This consciousness, this intelligence, this universal mind, this universal source is, quote, in everything. And it then has the capacity to be manifest in a zillion number of ways, including in the form of a human. So it's not like that God's just in us, but God's not in the cat or a finch or an earthworm. God would be, quote, from this point of view, this universal consciousness would be in everything. It's the source energy. But what's unique about, again, the human species compared to any other species that we know is that we can consciously access it. We can make requests of it. We can be of service to it in an intentional way. And that's laid out in that book.
Excellent. What else can you share with listeners about the nature of the divine, or the source of all that is?
Well, one of the things that for me is most fascinating about the source is that to the extent, and this I can say is something that I've observed repeatedly enough that I think that this is a scientifically demonstrable. It can be demonstrated in the future. I mean, I've witnessed it enough to know that it's probably true. Is that the more one lives a life of love and compassion and caring, if you would, the higher we evolve in our consciousness and service, the more we then have the capacity to be in harmony with and experience aspects of the one, what Larry Dossey calls the one mind. And one of the ways that expresses itself is in synchronicity. So the more one chooses to live in harmony with the highest intentions, the highest self, and so on, the more one will see evidence of, my wife, Rhonda, calls it the continuity of encouragement, not just subtle signs and symbols of interconnection between things, but you begin to see ever more evidence of the non-random nature of the universe being expressed in our daily lives. And literally, I teach a workshop at Canyon Ranch, which is a very distinguished health resort company in Tucson. I say company because they have Canyon Ranches in Tucson and Lenox and Miami and Las Vegas and so on and so forth. Is that I teach a workshop called Awakening the Power Within, which has to do with essentially, if you would, energy healing 101. And what's important is that I explain to people how the capacity to, as we become more energy aware and more loving, synchronicity occurs more in our lives. And to the extent that we celebrate it and have gratitude for it and enjoy it and in the service to it, we witness it and experience it and are part of it in ever greater ways.
Sure. Yeah, the sea life life as the exciting adventure that it is. We're asking Dr. Schwartz again his website, drdgaryschwartz.com. Be sure to visit. About suffering. Why is there suffering? If indeed we're infinite beings of energy, we're part of the source, why is suffering on Earth? And especially when it involves little children, hard for many people to understand.
Okay. Of course, it's a fundamental question. It's a very important question. My approach is multiple reasons for suffering, what we call suffering. Number one, it's protection. So, for example, as young children, we have to learn to not put our hands in fire, because if we put our hands in fire, we're going to get burned. How do we know not to put our hands in fire? Because we experience pain. Pain is a built-in mechanism, and its first and foremost purpose is to inform us when we've injured ourselves, and secondly, to enable us to learn not to injure ourselves in the future. So the notion of, quote, pain as in a built-in capacity for suffering is actually a gift. It's a gift because without it, of course, we will constantly be hurting ourselves. And people, by the way, who don't have the gift of pain are in serious jeopardy of hurting themselves. Secondly, if we don't have the capacity for fear, we'll not survive. So the whole capacity for fear is because sometimes there are real dangers. And so people who lose the capacity for fear are ones who are not necessarily going to, if you would, survive in the wild, like from animals and so on. And so fear is also a gift. What about depression? Well, depression is also a gift too, because if we don't feel a sense of sadness, we will be less likely to remain motivated and concerned with the people that we love. Our capacity to feel sadness and to feel loss, also to feel guilt, it's all in the service of our providing us with feedback, with motivation to love and to care. So these are not, quote, bad things per se. Now the question is, why does disease occur? And even worse, why do we do such cruel things to ourselves and others? And the primary explanation that I work with, and many people do, and have that throughout recorded history, is that one of the gifts that we're also given is the gift of relative freedom. We are given the opportunity to make choices, which includes making mistakes, and also to take responsibility. So the whole notion of blaming, quote, God, for example, on things that we could, quote, do ourselves, is to miss the point, because we want the freedom to be able to make choices. Everybody loves freedom, but with freedom comes responsibility. And the last thing, and this is, many people have this as a spiritual hypothesis. As far as I know, there's no scientific evidence one way or another if this is true or not, but I'm certainly open to it. And that is that some people come to the earth with a shortened life. Their suffering is not simply for them personally. It's not just that they're that they're serving karma. This is the way that they serve penance or make up for mistakes that they've made in the past, which is not impossible and probably true, but also because there's an agreement that one will come into a life and have suffering in order to help others learn compassion and to learn to take responsibility. So there could be many levels of why, quote, suffering occurs. And the conclusion that I've come to over the years is that the source that created this capacity for life and also gave us the freedom to grow and to explore and to, quote, make our own mistakes, has created a very wise and caring system.
Excellent. And, of course, the realization that we each are infinite beings of energy helps us understand that children, although they're young in earth age, are, like everyone else, infinite, evolved souls. That's perhaps the reason for their shortened earth experience. Well, another question we hear often, as you know, is about people wonder when they die, will they see departed loved ones? And it's so, is there a way to communicate with them now?
The answer is, and this I can speak to as an authority, having done so much research in this area, the evidence is clear. Absolutely yes, that not only when you die will you reconnect with the people that you love, but partly because you love them and partly because they love you. Love is what connects us. But more importantly, for many of us who are in the physical and a child or a parent or someone that we love passes on, we have the capacity to connect with that individual, and not just through mediums, but we can develop this capacity ourselves. And some of us like learning any skill. I could teach anyone to play chopsticks on the piano, but very few of us are going to become concert pianists. And if we want to become a concert pianist, it doesn't matter what our natural talent is. We have to put the time and energy and diligence in terms of practice and education and commitment and so on. And I have come to the conclusion that the same thing applies to the skill of being able to, quote, connect with the other side. And the future, I think, is going to be just like you and I can now talk over a great expanse. By the way, where are you located?
Ohio.
You're in Ohio. Okay, I'm in Tucson, Arizona. I can't see you, and you can't see me. And I'm talking over a wireless phone in my house going, probably for all I know, up into satellites and back down to you. I mean, we now take for granted that we can communicate with this technology. And I foresee, sooner rather than later, that we're going to be able to have this technology to connect with the other side as well, what we call the other side.
Excellent. I think that's true. And some of the reports I hear channeled from the other side saying it's all about telepathy, and we can each develop that ability. And can you speak a bit about how that telepathy or communication can be more subtle than most people expect, and that's why they might dismiss it?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Again, let's get back to looking up at the sky at night. We can see thousands of stars with the naked eye. But during the day, we look up at the sky, and I'm doing it right now, and by the way, we have a blue sky in Tucson. There are no stars. And the question is, what happened to all the starlight, the thousands of stars we can see with the naked eye and the trillions we can see with telescopes? Did all that starlight go disappear? Or is it all still there? It's just we can't see it because we're blinded by the brightness of the closest star in our vicinity, which we call the sun. Well, that is the explanation. In fact, that's why, in the city of Tucson or New York or whatever city we're in, we can't see very few stars because of, quote, light pollution. So the take-home message, the soundbite that occurred to me many years ago when I was a professor at Yale is sometimes we need to go into the dark in order to see the light. I repeat this. Sometimes we need to go into the dark in order to see the light. Mm-hmm. The information is subtle. It's below the level of the normal brightness of our conscious experience. That's why people went into caves. That's why people learn to meditate. That's why mediums learn how to still their mind and to get their emotions out of the way so they can pick up, quote, the subtle cues that are really there.
Great stuff. How about, Dr. Schwartz, what's your understanding about the question of ghosts or evil spirits?
Oh, that's probably the most controversial and taboo topics in all of science, if not in all of humanity. And many years ago, again, when I first started thinking about the physics of consciousness and survival of consciousness, it became very clear to me that the physics of what allows your or my consciousness to continue after it dies, or the energy and information of any living system, or any system after it, quote, dies, that the consciousness of the Hitlers of the world and the Osama bin Ladens of the world continues just as much as the consciousness of the Mother Teresas and the Martin Luther Kings. Energy is energy, information is information. And individuals don't just simply lose their pain and suffering and malevolent tendencies because they, quote, died. It's not instant enlightenment. And so consequently, the quote, if you would, the negativity continues. And so once you recognize that the negativity can continue, then you say, wow, well, then I have to be protected from this. And the question is, what kinds of protection is literally built into the structure of the cosmos? My working hypothesis for why there is a, quote, veil at all and has existed for such a long period of time is actually a divine protection, a source protection, so that we will not be potentially harmed by the, quote, negative forces that continue to exist. Now, it becomes a much more complex question. For the record, science doesn't want to touch this with a 110-foot pole. The implication is that all consciousness survives. And since all consciousness survives because all energy survives, the notion that there can be, quote, evil or dark forces, and both individual and even collective, has to be entertained. And science has not, as I said, wanted to address these questions, and we in the public are very frightened about this.
Sure.
And it's wise for us to be frightened about this, but that doesn't mean we have to be terrified by it, because there are all kinds of ways to minimize the impact of these kinds of forces and protect ourselves. I sometimes think of this as, if you would, as spiritual immunity. Just as we have biological immunity and psychological immunity, we can have spiritual immunity too. And many of the spiritual practices, including connecting with God and living in love and so on and so forth, all of that appears to really work.
The next question about those who take their own lives, there is, again, a continuation of consciousness. What's your understanding about maybe the particular scenarios that those who commit suicide encounter afterwards?
Suicide is not suicide. Some people commit suicide because they're severely grief-stricken, and they're depressed. And of course, after they've passed, what the evidence suggests is they wake up and they realize that they have been depressed and that their lives have had tremendous challenges. And of that group, a subset will decide that they, quote, made a mistake, and they will, have regrets for having both taken their own lives and also caused so much pain and suffering to other people that they loved. And then there are various ways that they can respond to this in terms of giving back to those they love, including both caring on the other side and also service, and also, returning to the earth again. But other people commit suicide because they feel that they're no longer, for example, of service. They're no longer able to help their family. They don't want to take any more resources. Native Americans, many of them, their tradition was that when they felt that they were becoming a burden on the tribe and were no longer of service to the tribe, they believed that they could be of better service to become a, quote, ancestor. And so what they would do is they would then go out into the desert and, quote, die. This was also, quote, suicide. But they weren't doing this out of depression or anger. They were doing this out of love. And then they would continue to be members of the tribe, but now in the ancestral realm rather than the physical realm. So I think that suicide is often tragic for the individual, but it's also an opportunity for growth.
Excellent. And of course, with the emerging baby boomer population aging, they've never been one to go quietly. And I think that there's going to be an uptick with this understanding that we each are infinite beings, an increase in choices to have a good death rather than do the long downhill suffering approach that makes a lot of money for big businesses but doesn't serve many people otherwise.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, you've touched on the next one a bit, but if you could say more, please, about how can I best hear my inner self's voice, my infinite energy part, and know my highest purposes?
Great question. For me, and I'm sure you and most of your conversationalists probably share similar views. The first thing is you have to be open that all of this is possible. You have to make the choice that you wish to do this. You have to have the intention to do this. And to do this with a sense of genuineness, ideally purity, and gratitude. So you enter a space of saying, this is the direction, this is how I want to live my life, this is what I wish to do as an individual. Secondly, there are various kinds of techniques that one can use to learn how to, quote, meditate, to quiet one's mind, and so on. And one of the things that I do in the various, quote, techniques and philosophies that I've learned is I personally focus very much on love. So the phrase that I use, and again many others use, is that energy flows where the loving mind goes. And so the notion of consciously putting oneself into a loving mind state, literally doing exercises where you put your hands on your heart and your hands on your abdomen, and as you're breathing in, you're feeling the energy flowing up your left arm into your heart, and you're thinking the words love heart. And then as you're breathing out, you feel and imagine the energy flowing down your right arm into your right hand, and you're thinking the words love breath. So you're engaged in this process of not just paying attention to your heart and not just paying attention to your breath and not just relaxing, but you're literally filling your consciousness with love for your heart and love for your breath. And if you do that, not only is it extremely relaxing and not only does it give it you energy, but it takes you into the path of being love-focused. And as you become love-focused and you develop this loving energy habit of mind and habit of heart, it then becomes easier to discern and connect with one's higher capabilities.
Excellent. Anything else you'd like to say about that one?
Well, one other thing that I'm happy to share is that, and this is, if you would, a personal discovery that came to me about 6 months ago, and I've done research now with probably close to 400 people testing this. And a lot of people go, do this, I just didn't know this. But instead of thinking the words love heart, love breath, for example, you think the words divine love heart and divine love breath. That when you shift your consciousness from love in just if you would, the personal love, to the notion of divine, and that word particularly works for me. What most people experience is that their experience is more intense, it's broader, they feel it more over their whole body, and they connect with higher experiences. So your audience might want to compare those two in their own personal lives.
Evolving beyond our religious teachers, what could you share with us about that, please?
Sure. Well, first of all, we have to understand that most of our religions have come from many thousands of years ago. And these people did the best that they could with the knowledge that they had, which was minimal. Remember, people used to think then that the earth was flat. People used to think then that the sun revolved around the earth. People used to have all kinds of beliefs that were quote, naive by today's standards. So it's not surprising that that our spirituality is going to grow as our knowledge grows. So first of all, we have to forgive our churches. We have to forgive our temples. We have to forgive our mosques. We have to forgive the writings of people who have not progressed beyond the history of their time. And so we have to keep a constantly open mind. Now, so that's one philosophy. The second thing is that in almost every spiritual tradition, there are certain grains of truth. There are certain essences. And we can celebrate those essences, and we can also celebrate the genuineness of the people who are seeking these paths, but still treat them as historical, and then honor them, but then, if you would, follow the evidence. I believe that we need to develop evidence-based faith, not faith that's based on history and dogma per se, but ones where it's a constant process of evolution. In fact, there's a new website called eternia.org. It's not eternity, but eternia.org, which was actually founded by Dr. Evan Alexander, who wrote the book Proof of Heaven, and Mr. John Audette, who is really the larger vision. And what they've done is, and it's converging science and spirituality. And what they've done is they've offered 7 postulates, spiritual postulates, that are based on scientific evidence, which turn out to be the cornerstone of most religions. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to, if you would, promote each of us developing and expanding our spiritual understanding, which happens to be also supported by science, which is really wonderful. That science is not taking away spirituality, it's actually taking us to spirituality, so that we can evolve as individuals and at the same time still be kind and caring to all the respective traditions that we've been raised in. I do believe, if push came to shove, the truth is that all of us are going to have to grow. We're going to have to grow together. And if that means that some of the, quote, facts that we once believed were true we have to change, so be it. Remember, we all thought the sun revolved around the earth, and we were all wrong. And that's okay. The critical thing is that we can learn and grow accordingly.
And, of course, the nice thing is with all of this evidence-based evidence we have now, we can release fears. We know that God is not some big vengeful guy in the sky who's going to smite us and send us to hell forever.
Yep.
If we question, and we can look at these with a more clear perspective.
I agree.
Yep. Okay, so the last two questions really can be combined into one, and that is, how can all this information, all these understandings, help us deal with our personal lives, our challenges that invariably occur, and then how can we help make the world a better place?
What a great question. Singers such as John Denver, John Lennon, Michael Jackson, people who were singers and composers, they expressed in music, I think, also this evolving spirituality. And there was a song called "The Man in the Mirror" about if we wish to contribute to the solving of humanity's greatest problems, including the mess that we've made of the planet and so on. It has to begin from within. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror first, make the decision that we're going to change ourselves, and then as we grow and change, we can then contribute to others. By the way, that's also the spirit behind groups like Eternia. They're trying to create communities that will encourage hope. And the conclusion that I've come to is that whether we get our inspiration from spiritual leaders or scientists or entertainers, the critical thing is that we come to accept the truth of these fundamental preferences. Mark, I really appreciate the fact you keep reminding us that we're infinite beings, that we're part of an infinite energy, that this is really true, and that once we remember that that's our core essence, it changes the way we see everything. It changes the way we approach life. Once we start thinking of ourselves, stop thinking of ourselves as this limited being suffering on a small physical planet, and there isn't a greater reality that we're part of. Once we get rid of that conventional wisdom, if you would, and see the greater one, which is also consistent with ancient beliefs, it provides us with hope, it provides us with inspiration, it encourages to develop our capacity to love, the capacity to be of service, to take a bigger picture. I'll give you an example. This may sound a little funny, but I'm going to announce it. I was invited to become the new chairman of this organization, Eternia.org. And when I did, I was speaking with the CEO and president about this, and I said, the mission of Eternia is really important. It will facilitate this process. And I said, but I don't just think of my life in terms of 10 or 20 years on this planet. I do envision the soul phone coming along. I do envision being of service for a long time to come, because that's what I care about. So I said, okay, I'll make a deal with you. I'm willing to do this, but only if we make a commitment to be of service to this particular organization for the next 200 years. Notice, I didn't say eternity. I just said 200 years. Now, I don't mean in the physical. I don't expect to be living physically in my body 200 years. Quite the contrary. Not that I'm saying it's impossible. I just don't anticipate it. But what I do anticipate is that I continue to be of service, quote, on the other side, particularly as the bridges between here and there get built. So this whole notion of taking a longer view in our lives changes the way you live your daily moments. Why do I do a radio show like this? Because I wish in my own small way to share what I've been learning and help others go on the path as well. With Facebook and with our tweeting and with our loved ones. That's how it goes.
Well, Dr. Schwartz, the hour has flown by, and partly because of your remarkable combination of intellect and love. And anyone who's been around scientists realize that they're not all so caring and loving and open-minded, but certainly Dr. Schwartz is. So for all the people whose lives you've touched and will touch, thank you very much for that. Wonderful.